Hi, Lynn. And hi, friends who are coming in. Welcome, welcome. We're giving you some things to do as you walk in, and as folks settle into their seats. Um, I was going to say proverbial. That's not really a proverb, but that they're literal or virtual seats. Um, we've got a little poll for y'all to answer. You'll find on the right side of your screen, and you're going to hear me go North Carolina today a little bit, Lynn. I
Oh,
feel
excellent. Bring that draw. Bring
North
this
Carolina.
thing.
You're going to hear my North Carolina come out. And then in the chat, you'll see that we've got two options for this morning's check-in question. So if you've been on one of my sessions before, you know that I do like a check-in question. And the two options are, number one, you can either answer, who's your favorite actor or actress? Or number two, the question is, when did you last sing to yourself or to someone else? And just to get things rolling here, I want to put you on the spot, Lynn. And you didn't know I was going to ask you to do this, but I'd love for you to answer one of those questions, whichever one speaks to your heart more. Who's your favorite actor, actress, or when did you last sing to yourself or to someone else? What comes to mind for you?
Oh gosh. Well, can I do a tie between John Cusack and Sarah Jessica Parker and just like solidify my Gen X identity right there?
You may. Nice. My check-in is I'm going to answer question two. I last sang to myself this morning in the car with my daughter, driving her to school about an hour ago. We were singing Hamilton, which I know you too are a fan of,
Yes.
and we were singing, and we were singing. I mean, a bunch of different songs, like 6 different songs, in preparation for Friday. We're going to go see Hamilton in the theater, like for real,
Oh my
because it's
God.
happening in Los Angeles. And yeah, the what I'm particularly drawn to is the way she's starting to rap as a 7-year-old, which is kind of amazing. And she'll be like kind of walking around the house rapping to herself. And it reminds me of a young me, like trying to learn to rap and feeling like this connection to rap and like the hip hop community, but also feeling like distance from it. Cause I'm like, can that be a part of me? Can I claim that? I have no idea if any of that's happening for her, but that's still going on for me, but it wasn't going on for her. So
That's so cool.
Melissa says, I sang to my song last night in Canto. Awesome. So basically Hamilton. Nice. There's the Lin-Manuel connection.
Come on.
Catherine was singing this morning in the car. Come on, Eileen. Oh, lovely. More 80s and 90s stuff. Fleetwood Mac in the car. We got a lot of singers. I sing to myself and my kids daily. Um, Patricia Clarkson coming in during the Super Bowl halftime show. Yes, Rachel, representing LA. Speaking of hip hop, I love that. I love
Oh,
that.
it was such a good halftime show. Oh my God. Oh,
I was super into it too. I wasn't into the setup of the way that you couldn't see everybody, but anyway. But I loved seeing some of my what feel like old friends. Of course,
yes.
Ray and Snoop are not my actual old friends, but well, hi and welcome to our session. I'm Ethan. This is Lynn. You're going to meet Lynn in more full depth in just a minute, where Lynn's going to do a quick intro. But for now, let's see who's here. Let's take a look at the poll. We've got 64% independent consultants, 14% private independent school counselors, and then a few public and charter school counselors. And then we've got one teacher or principal, oh, two now, and then a few parents. So cool. Awesome. Well, welcome, y'all. This is we're going to be sharing some practical resources. You know that if you know me, and if you know Lynn, you know that we love the practical. So today we're going to first do some like announcements and heads up of things that are kind of coming up. We're going to do. I'm going to talk about vulnerability and why I think it's important in this process and how we can know the specific thing. Where they said in the email that I sent is which questions are more likely to be effective when we're trying to get those deep stories, what Lynn calls the student's storytelling gold. How do we help draw them out? Then I'm going to kick it over to Lynn to talk about trimming and cutting. Lynn's got some really specific strategies on when to start, why, how to actually get in and cut on the big level, on the micro level. I'm going to talk about what I call my pharmacist approach, which is like when I get an essay or an essay topic, how do I do a quick scan to decide if it's like, yay, good topic, or maybe keep working. And I've got a little paradigm, a little graph that I'll share for that. And then what am I looking for? Like, what are the questions that I'm asking myself when it comes to, is this essay working or not? Where does it need help? And then specific resources, how I assign specific resources to students. And then Lynn's going to talk a little bit about working with parents and some pro tips there. And if we've got time, I don't know if we'll have time because this is a lot to cover. I'm going to talk about structuring individual sessions and how I do that, how we do that. And then I'm going to do a little PSA for a course that Lynn and I are teaching. I'm teaching most of it, but Lynn's coming in for some really specific, awesome parts of it, which we'll get into and explain in a little bit. By way of just introing and welcoming you, happy Black History Month, by the way. A quote rather, that I really resonate with is something that Obama said. I don't know when exactly he said this, but he said, change will not come if we wait for some other person or some other time. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the change that we seek. Mm. So that's what's bringing me some inspiration this morning. If anyone is interested in issues of equity and access, there's an organization doing some great work. I'm going to post a link. I'm going to post a few links in the chat here. It's the Anti-Racist Educational Institute, and Ashley and Brittany are doing some incredible stuff. They've got a lot of resources. One of the resources that I love that I heard about from them comes from the Center for Racial Justice. And I'm going to share another link here. This is basically Black History Month resources for educators, for families. I'm sharing that in the chat. And we'll follow up with all these links, by the way. And then a resource that we created last year, and maybe you were on the webinar that I did for this one, is 40 ways and counting that counselors can bring more equity to the college admissions process. Again, we will, yes, of course, sending it out as a recording and sending out all the links. But this is a big list that we put together with colleagues, friends, for how to center equity and peace today, which is the title of the podcast I did with Marie Bigham 2 years ago. But there's also, to just ping this real quick, the Anti-Racist Educational Institute, Institute for Anti-Racist Education does this cool white anti-racist accountability group. And it's a self-paced course. I took it last year. It's really great. It's about 2 weeks. It took me like just a few nights to do it, actually, and gave me some more resources and ideas for equity thoughts. But there are a bunch of ideas here for those of y'all who are interested. 2 more quick announcements. We've got, oh, by the way, I want to just throw this one. This is a resource that's linked on that same doc. But Erica Copeland, who works with me, she's the Matchlighters program director, put together this list of 100+ community-based organizations and nonprofits that are accepting volunteers. So again, you'll find this list linked on this doc right here. But if you're interested in volunteering for these great organizations, there's information on who they are and who to contact, and a little video even on what that resource is. So I just wanted to ping that. The other thing that I wanted to share with y'all is we've got coming up this week and next week, we've got a mini course. We're doing these mini courses that are focused on some particular aspect of the college admissions process. So Lynn came in for an essay one that we did in January. This is our next one. It's a 1-day mini course, and this one is specifically for counselors and educators, and it's led by Amanda Miller. She'll share things like, how do you convince students to cut down on those just-in-case applications without being so mean? How do you help students? How do you quickly talk about where do I find scholarships, answer to common questions? How do you help assess a student's financial aid profile and get them the resources they need in under 15 minutes? How do you here's a handout for helping students decode award letters. So, what we're trying to sort of do is I asked her to kind of do the more advanced level, slightly more advanced. So this isn't going to be sort of your typical, like, what is the FAFSA? It's more like, how do you talk to students and parents about financial aid? And she'll be sharing a bunch of resources that she's been using over the last, I guess, 8 or 10 years. We met at IECA and she blew my mind. And she created this amazing resource called the Paying for College resource that is just super thorough. And so I really appreciate her as a colleague and thinker. And that course, you can sign up for that. We'll share more info on that later. Okay, enough commercials. Lynn, I want the people to meet you. Will you share just a bit of context of your background and who you are and what brings you here today?
Absolutely. Hi, everyone. I'm Lynn Fairchild Hawks, and I am a college essay coach with CEG. I also run my own business called Success Story, which is college essay consulting. In my other life, I'm a young adult author. I'm a former high school English teacher and a middle school teacher in public and independent schools. And I also used to run online programs for gifted youth at the Duke University Talent Identification Program. So I had a lot of different roles as teacher, trainer, administrator, but also educator. So I'm just thrilled to be here today to talk shop with you about like the rocket science of what we do. I find that really fun. How do we problem solve some of the things that we find, most challenging? And so I'm really glad Ethan included me today.
Oh, I'm so glad you're here. I love, like you said, talking shop with you. Lynn was on one of my advanced courses last year, and I was just like so awesome. I was like, oh, you should teach this course. So here we are, 6 months later, or whatever it is, now 8 months later, and here. And so I'm so glad to have your wisdom and your insight, because you see things I don't see, which I really appreciate. So I want to talk about vulnerability a little bit, and I want to offer you something there's a book that I was reading just over this last basically couple months. I've been thinking a lot about the culture of our organization as a college essay guy, and how do we build just a great place to work. And if you don't know me, I've been doing this for probably about 15 years. I took a break for grad school, but I've been thinking a lot about just vulnerability, and it's so important to me in my life. I think where it comes from for me is I grew up as a missionary kid, and I moved around a ton, and I went to like 13 schools. And part of the way I realized like 5 years ago that I created safety for myself was by inviting vulnerability from the people that I met, because I knew that I needed to sort of create a space for safety, because I didn't know how long I was going to be in a place, or when I was going to be, when I was going to be leaving. And so I think this is sort of like, if you think about what is the birth of, college essay guy, my origin story, it was really about creating a space for vulnerability. And I realized that I bring that into so many of my relationships, and I'm made fun of by my friends for like wanting to have, deep, quiet conversations in the middle of the corner of the party. And so I was reading this, and that's part of like my low-key introversion. I think I present as an extrovert, but I was reading this book called The Culture Code by Daniel Coyle, and I was reading about there's a thing called the vulnerability loop, and he presents these questions, and I'm going to share with you these questions, these two sets of questions, and I'll take a look at these. And this set A of the questions these are from something called the experimental generation of interpersonal closeness, which I'll scroll down, and we'll share these out. But these are from psychologists Arthur and Elaine Aron. But what they did is they shared these questions with folks, and then they basically tested to see how close do they feel. So take a look at set A. What was the best gift you ever received, and why? Set B, question B. So question 2, describe the last pet you owned. Where did you go to high school? What was your high school like? Who's your favorite actor or actress? And then you've got set B. If a crystal ball could tell you the truth about yourself, your life, the future, anything else, what would you want to know? Is there something you've dreamed of doing for a long time? Why haven't you done it? What's the greatest accomplishment of your life? And when did you last sing to yourself or someone else? And what you might notice is, like, in some ways, these question sets are similar in that they do invite personal shares. But you might have noticed that one or more of these questions maybe made you feel like, oh, I don't know if I'd answer that one right now publicly, for example. Like the one for me is like, that's a little bit edgy, is what is the greatest accomplishment of your life? And for me, I think that one's tough for me is like, I think I feel some shame sometimes about like owning things that I'm proud of. And I feel like, I don't know. I mean, I feel a little teary actually thinking about that. I actually feel so kind of vulnerable around it in such a way that I don't actually want to answer the question. And so I'm noticing like there's a mental thing that's happening. Remember, I'm like stopping short of actually answering it. And I'm noticing like, I think my heart rate is picking up just a little bit as I'm talking about it. So, I mean, I think, we could argue about, oh, this question is more vulnerable for me or that one. But in this, just to give you the sense of context of why I'm sharing this, the case of this experiment, and there's a full set of questions, 36 questions. And I think this might be the questions that came out and kind of went, viral in the New York Times. I don't know if this is the exact set of questions, but it was a set of questions to feel closer to folks. And there's this cool little story in this book, The Culture Code, where two of the folks, they basically did this experiment with 71 pairs of strangers. And one of the pairs of strangers, but part of it, they also involved 4 minutes of like eye gazing. One of the pairs of strangers actually ended up getting married. And then they invited everyone from the lab to the wedding ceremony. So the reason I'm bringing this up, and it may be kind of obvious, but you're probably putting some pieces together, is that I feel like there are certain questions that if we're brave enough to answer them ourselves, or we're brave enough to ask them of our students, they can do a thing. and they can do this vulnerability thing. But there's an important piece to this, and it's not just like asking the question. It's like the moment after we get the response, the way that we receive that sends a signal to whoever's been doing the asking, or sorry, whoever's been doing the answering. So what I mean by this is like, let me share my face for just a second. And this happens in groups where we see this, where like someone shares vulnerably, and then the way that's received in the group really has an impact on the rest of the group. So, if I am facilitating something and I share vulnerably and there's like a pause and everyone can kind of see like, okay, Ethan didn't die or nothing happened. My therapist has said to me before that like vulnerability is actually people having feelings about your own life, that's sort of like creating a loop. And so I think that the moment after, so think of it this way, the moment, so let's say you've asked a question of a student and they share a thing. The moment that like our response in that moment, I think does a lot for the session. So just to use a specific example, if I ask a student one of these questions, what's the greatest accomplishment of your life? And the student shares something that's meaningful to them. And I have this like two forks diverging in a yellow road. I go, oh yeah, that reminds me of this one time that I kind of, you've seen people do this, take off on a story about my own life. And I don't really see or acknowledge that student. Or another option is to share impact of what the student has shared. Then we're maybe missing an opportunity there. So I want to offer two things. One is like a set of potential questions that maybe some of you see, maybe some of you haven't, that can give you just more questions in your arsenal to ask students. And then if we did the 2-hour version, I would totally put us into pairs and have us try this. I want to offer you just a little set of ways of thinking about this again from the culture code of sort of thinking about how this goes back and forth between folks. So the first one is, let me just share my screen again, right quick. I was at one point not last year, this was like years ago, but I was doing a counseling program, and a friend in that program, somebody I was co-counseling with, wanted to come up with some better questions to ask people at parties. And so we generated this huge list on a Google Doc but we called it, questions to ask strangers at parties, because I sensed that he was asking questions that were like, kind of like, what do you do for a living? And I was like, maybe you could come up with some other questions. And so we came up with some other questions together. And so that became this list of 100 brave and interesting questions, which if you just Google brave and interesting questions, it comes up. And you'll see questions like, what's the toughest decision you made today? Or what have you forgotten? Or what's it like being you right now? And I've found that these questions, sometimes when I'm stuck or I'm in a jam with a student, I'm trying to figure out where should we go? I'll just pull out this question on like Google interesting questions, and I'll have the student pick. So I give them some agency around it. And I'm like, hey, pick a question. Which one, feels interesting to answer? And then I pick one and I do the same thing, or I'll answer the same question the student answered. Because I think that moment, right, of going out on the skinny limb ourselves and sort of modeling that vulnerability is super important. I want to share, this is again from this great book, The Culture Code. This is the 4 steps that Mr. Coyle outlines. So person A sends a signal of vulnerability. And what do I mean by vulnerability? It's that sign, I'm weakness. I have a weakness. I could use help. I have flaws. And I'm not talking about super high level, like sharing your, deepest, darkest secrets of what's going on in your marriage. I'm talking about what is the thing that you long for, right? Rather than sort of just asking the students to do all the vulnerable work. Person B detects this signal. So let's say it's Lynn and me, and Lynn has shared something vulnerable. I noticed that this has been something vulnerable. I have a choice here, and I can potentially, if I want, signal my own vulnerability. And again, not by like turning into story about something that I'm really struggling with, but for example, just sharing the impact of what Lynn has shared with me. So maybe Lynn shares something about something that's difficult for her. And I can simply say, and again, this is going to be like 101 for some of y'all, but I can simply share impact and say, I'm really touched by that. And just pause right there and like, let that be it. Like, I really appreciate you sharing that. That's another version, right? This is all, so for some of you, this is 101. It's sort of like that reflective listening, but just sharing impact can send that signal of safety. And I want to I know, again, this is like, I'm maybe spending, like, why is Ethan spending 10 minutes talking about this one moment? I think that this is the moment where we start to create the thing, where, again, quoting my therapist, Peter, where I'm starting to potentially open up to having feelings about Lynn's life. Person A, Lynn, detects the signal. Oh, wow. Yeah, this is a safe space. and it sends that norm. It starts to normalize that, yeah, this is a place where we can be safe. So I wanted to just break that down in those steps and share those questions, which again, we'll follow up in via email. And kick it over to you, Lynn, for talking about, this is going to be, actually, let me just pause for a second because I tend to like go fast in these sessions, but I want to just hear if there are any reflections or thoughts on what I've shared so far. Again, some of you might feel like, yes, basic 101, got it, Ethan. And also invite questions. So I'm going to pause to just allow folks to do that. And there's this weird like 30-second delay, Lynn, so questions might be coming in, but I actually do want to make a transition to your section of talking about trimming and cutting, and it's going to be kind of a sharp turn. I don't know how we, speaking of segues, how we make that transition, but I want to jump to the next thing because we've got so much cool stuff to talk about. So I'm going to kick it over to you.
I love that you said all this because I can really build on that in one particular slide, because I was assuming this stuff has happened before my stuff happens. So this is cool.
Great.
Okay, let's see. Get the sharing going here. Hopefully you can see this. And Ethan, can you let me know, is that big enough for everybody?
That's great. I think so.
Okay. So, but that's in, okay, cool. Let me know if it needs to be any bigger, or maybe the slideshow thing. Here we go.
Yep.
This should be good, right? Okay,
making
work. Yeah. Okay. So this is very skillsy, what I'm about to do, but it's going to build off what Ethan just said in a nice way. As an author, I'm often cutting words, and I've written a bunch of books. Sometimes I'm faced with cutting like 20K words. And so that got me thinking, like, how do we help students do this very painful process of cutting? And so the first part is what Ethan just said. First, I got to let them hold forth. So I'll talk about that in a second. Then how do I help them cut? How do I help them see what's essence versus, fluff? And could I give them an author's crash course in editing while we're trying to, wrangle the college essay? And the methods I'm using that I'm going to share with you, my students often say to me, whoa, I didn't realize how many words I could cut, and now I'm always kind of looking for the extras, and this is actually a little fun, and that's great for me to feel like, okay, I'm getting somewhere with them. So I teach them 3 things, basically. First, believe that you can overwrite, be vulnerable, tell all of your story, but then you got to underwrite, and you got to know then what to cut and how to cut, right? So the first thing I do want to say is this is the end. This is like the last few days. This is the last few weeks, depending on how you set up a schedule with students. I have done this with students in 4 days. I've done it over 4 weeks or more. I put November here just because that feels like a deadline time when the bomb's about to go off. So the whole vulnerability thing that Ethan was just talking about, this is, when we establish that trust and we get them to story tell and everything, I'm just like a broken record. I'm like, be generative, overwrite, tell me more. Don't worry about word count. So that's kind of how I kick off my relationship with students. And I'm just going to give you some quick assumptions before we get to cutting. I'm always finding at least 5 things to celebrate in every draft, and I'm nerding out on the things that work. Oh, wow, please replicate this. You've got this great voice in this one line, or I love this specific detail here. Oh, cool use of, an analogy or simile here. Wow, you're being super honest and authentic here, so please replicate that. And as Ethan mentioned, I have this phrase like that's storytelling gold, and I'll keep highlighting it with yellow. I'm getting them to do a lot of cinematic detail. And when I say that, I don't mean like telling a full feature film. This might be just 2 sentences of cinematic detail in the middle of a tiny anecdote. So anyway, assuming this is like a whole other workshop we could talk about here, but the whole time I'm saying, trust me, as we're blowing through the word count way beyond, hey, I've helped this one student cut 1,200 words. Don't worry, So later. So I say that a lot. Don't worry, we'll cut. There's 4 strategies I'm going to teach you. So I'm going to show you the kind of slides I use, and I would invite you to make your own based on your own students' work. And I set it up like, maybe they're on draft 5, 6, or 7 later on. Sometimes students will come to me and they are already on draft 5, and I just work with them for a few days or weeks, But others who I've been like working all the way through, I'm like, okay, now let's have some fun cutting words. And they're like, fun? Yeah, well, fortunately, I happen to know A.S. King. She is a young adult author who has influenced me with this concept that I've turned into my little mini lesson game with students. She says revision is a sport. And if you know who she is, she's won several awards as a young adult author. She happens to be my professor in MFA program. I'm in creative writing. So check out her work if you haven't. But she basically makes it a page-by-page game for herself as a professional author. And every page she's like, I know I could get rid of 20%. And she actually has a funny name about the chainsaw effect that she has as she goes through. So she gets in this chainsaw mode, but this is towards the end. And this is how I'll pitch it to a student. I'll say, hey, well, look, listen, 650 words, you got to get it to, from 800 to 650, right? Well, in 10 paragraphs, like just cut 15 words a paragraph. That's not so bad, right? I bet we can find that. And I actually do the math with them in a little game format of just like, ooh, how many did we cut now? How many did we cut now? So this mini lesson practice, as I'm doing it, please feel free to join the chat and just tell me what words you would cut. And there's no right answer, by the way. And so I'm going to just tell you the steps so you can kind of see them unfold. First, I explain why we do it, the rationale, and when cutting should occur. This is what professional authors do, and this is why we don't focus on it in the beginning. I'm model and practice with them with slides. This is like a 10-minute mini lesson with them. And then we practice cutting together on other people's work. So it's low stakes. And then I model within the students' draft themselves. I'll go into their first paragraphs and I'll just strike through and say, here's some ways you can cut just like we practiced. Then in their own paragraphs, halfway through the essay, I say, well, why don't you try with paragraph 3 or 4 now? See how you do. And then the next time I look at the draft, after they've done a little cutting, I say, hey, I bet you could, cut 10 words from this paragraph. Why don't you try that? So I will tell you that these are the things we try to keep: authenticity, vulnerability, voice, the cinematic detail that shows the you of the student lifting off the page. We're trying to cut the other stuff so we can leave more of this, right? Too much sports commentary, like too much elaboration that's vague, eloquent, spicy vocabulary, pretty vocabulary, all those extra words. So here's the first slide I'll give to a student using, again, low stakes. You could pull a line, ask one of your former students, hey, if you work independently with students or in a school setting, pick a line from another student that you've gotten permission from and say, can I use this to help my students practice and see how they would cut? So that's what I've done here. Now, I think this is pretty easy, right? Strategy 1, word by word, the safest in the game. It's so cool to see, like in a paragraph, if you cut 1 word per sentence and 15 words are gone. That's so easy and low stakes. So I'll say to a student, well, which word can we cut? And as you can imagine, I'm sure you all probably saw that. That is like gold because you can get rid of lots of that and, save a bunch of space right there. So that's strategy 1, word by word. And again, students remember this because they have the little phrase, strategy 1, word by word. And then we celebrate, oh, we got rid of 1. So small, but it matters. And then strategy 2 is phrase by phrase. What's most essential in this sentence? Where are we getting a little bit just, slowing down the motion of the sentence and the momentum, okay? So this is from one of my students and from 2 years ago. And I just love this. He was writing an essay on culture and travel. And so I'm going to read this to you, and I want you to be looking for phrases that could be cut. So in the 55th minute, with the game deadlocked at 0, South African winger Sipiwe Teshabala fired a rocket of a ball into the top corner of the net to score the first goal of the tournament. A reaction of shock in the crowd quickly turned to joy. This is good writing, right? But because he had gold elsewhere, I wanted to cut wherever we could so that he could A, get to 650, and B, just make room for a few more details about his other experiences in high school, like being an intellectual in his AP class, that kind of thing. So as you ask yourself what you would cut, I'm going to give you a hint here that this to me is a lot of gold. I mean, this is a kid who is such a sports fan and travels that he knew that the game was deadlocked at 0. He knew the name of the winger. He used a great metaphor, rocket of a ball, top corner of the net, first goal of the tournament. I'm like, it's really hard for me to mess with this stuff, right? This is just my bias too, because remember, you don't have the full context of the essay, obviously. So that matters. But also, this is sort of my filter of what I consider to be gold. So here's what we got rid of, okay? And you have this long, beautiful sentence, and then you end with shock turned to joy. It's a nice kind of writing there. And he obviously can manage a huge long sentence, but that pacing thing, that's also really cool for a reader to encounter. So we celebrated the 7 gone. What's really cool is when students do this with me, when I do the mini lesson, they always see different stuff and can argue for it. And I like that they're engaging that way to build their own skill set. And I always tell students, listen, this is your essay. There's more than one way to do it. You need to be as involved in me here. Okay. So let's dialogue back and forth. And I really try to honor their perspective in this. Here's another one. I want to practice again with phrase by phrase, because this is really a key space where, kids can see different things. So just take this in for a minute as I read it. And if you want, you can throw in the chat what you would cut. One doctor's appointment for my semi-annual scoliosis curve progression check would lead me to being told that I would have to wear, and the end of this sentence is, a brace. So this student who did this, when we worked on cutting this line, or the phrases here, she really did a great job with this. And she said at one point, I think I need to replace some words with just one word. And I was like, exactly. You do need to do that. And that's part of the art of phrase by phrase, is finding just one word. So this is what we removed. This was her decision as we worked through it. One doctor's appointment for my semi-annual scoliosis check would reveal I would have to wear a brace. Now, another set of students over the years analyzed this with me, and one student said, well, isn't it implied it's a doctor's appointment? Do you even need that? And I was like, God, that's a good point. I hadn't seen that. One appointment for a scoliosis check would reveal I would have to wear. So the semi-annual also left, and it's just cool when other kids weigh in, because you can see things that you didn't see before. So we celebrate either 7 or 9 words are gone. So again, ultimate goal, like I'm saying, make room for gold. Now, line by line is sentences or independent clauses. The same student who we were just talking about here, this is another section. So see if you can find an independent clause in here that you're like, okay, this could go. When I started wearing my brace in public, most of the people that I knew at school were extremely supportive about my situation, but a few people did not understand. Some people knocked on my brace or whispered and pointed as I walked by. So as you're looking at that, the storytelling is great. But there's probably, if you're fighting for a sentence or two to go or an independent clause, you could remove something. And so in this case, you see the little words that went away, and see the gold of the actual thing that people did, knocking on her brace, whispering and pointing. A few people did not understand is the generalization, right? That's the umbrella statement that kind of has already been said. When you have this really chilling piece of gold here, right? People knocked on it, like that really hits me between the eyes, which is why we could get rid of that. She also saw that too after we worked through it. And so that was 12 gone right there, which felt like a little victory for us. And finally, I'm not going to say a whole lot about this because this really depends on the full essay and what Ethan calls the log line. But you have to really look at the entire context of the essay and say, where am I repeating main ideas that the reader can already figure out? Or where am I leaving my core values and topics? And so again, you kind of have to figure out what is the thesis statement behind the scenes, if there is one, and where you're being redundant, said it before, said it well. So this is strategy for idea by idea. And I basically, if Ethan, you can talk a little bit more about log lines if we have time, but if you develop a log line like they do for movie scripts, which is basically that elevator pitch that you can say in 30 seconds to a potential producer as you're going from floor 1 to floor 3 or something, pitching your film, it's like a North Star. If you can get your entire essay into a couple sentences. And so asking a student, this whole section here, does this relate to your main argument, or are you kind of going off road here? What can I cut that doesn't follow my North Star? So we don't really have time to get into a whole lot of this, but I just want to make a point that the student is really in this particular essay arguing that she and this friend that she lost to suicide basically took care of each other a lot. And because she says that in multiple places in the essay, I told her it's okay to let it go here because you're saying it so beautifully elsewhere. That is the log line of your entire piece, and how you were resilient in the face of a tragedy, and now you want to be working with youth and helping youth because of the tragedy that you went through and why you want to study psychology. So this gold example of how he used to make her feel good, sending her these fun memes and things, worked well enough early in the essay that she could cut this little bit of excess here. It's kind of an overlap, with line by line, but it's also knowing your essay log line. So basically, I don't want to take too much more time. I'm going to stop there. I had just one more slide. And hopefully, Ethan, I've stopped sharing there. So yes, and right there.
You've shared so much. I love it. Thank you. I love the way your brain works. And I really appreciate the getting into the specifics in particular. And I love the idea of just, creating that, because it takes a little bit of work, but having just those examples for students that you could share and be like, here's the thing, try it. And that skill building is actually going to be one of those, I think what you're saying is like those stitch in time saves nine things, where if we can teach students to do it for themselves, teach them how to fish, right? I'm mixing all my metaphors, then they're learning to do it for themselves. And that's what we want for them anyway. And it can be hard to remember to do that, right? Especially when we're like jamming.
Yes.
But I think that's such an important and a relatively low-lift skill. Here's a quick 5-minute lesson on how to do this. And then just model it for them and then let them, because there's some part of them that does know how to do this, but like walking them through that is super rad. I want to just do a quick transition to sharing with y'all this thing about what I call the pharmacist approach. So when it comes to helping students pick a topic, students are they're either writing about a challenge or they're not. And if they're not writing about a challenge, they're writing what I call a montage. And when I'm looking at a montage topic, which is basically just a particular theme that connects to different parts of the student, I'm asking myself, how elastic and how uncommon is the topic? So, I find that if a student's writing about basketball, for example, then that's going to be a pretty common topic, right? And by elastic, I mean, is it stretchy enough to talk about lots of different sides of themselves? So, a student might have lots to say about basketball, but it's still kind of about basketball. And so it's going to be kind of hard for them to stand out. Whereas if the student's writing about beatboxing, more uncommon, that might be more likely to stand out. So I in my mind, I've kind of got this graph going. And I'm not saying that students need to write about an uncommon topic that's elastic in order to have a great essay, because I've seen great essays that are on common topics like food stand out. It's just going to take a higher level of craft and execution in order to really make that one pop. But I'm asking, the reason I'm offering this is when you're trying to talk to a student about, like, if you think a topic probably isn't working, chances are it's either because it's somewhat common or it's not really connecting to a lot of different sides of the student. So you're really not learning much about them. And by, again, different sides of the student, I'm thinking about what are the different values, and is there a variety of values that the student's going to be showing. When it comes to challenges-based essays, which I call narrative essays, I find that the essays that stand out often have more compelling challenges and stronger insights. And so again, I'm not saying a student has to write about a difficult challenge. I'm certainly not advocating for that. I think students don't need to write about challenges. They can write a beautiful, brilliant montage essay and, get into great schools. But when I see those wow narrative essays, I go, wow, those challenges were really compelling. Or even though the initial challenge didn't seem all that compelling, I got a real sense of the impacts it had on that student's life. And that's what helped me understand why this was a story worth telling. And then, sometimes students have that problem of, like, they'll have some strong challenges, but they just don't have that insight yet. And, we can talk in the Q&A if we want, or we can, I know Lynn could do a whole separate course on insight. We may do that, in fact. But it's those essays that have those compelling challenges and those wow insights that tend to be those standout ones. So again, not saying this is the way that students have to do it, but these tend to be why I think often essays stand out. And so this is a tool that I'll talk to you about how to get access to this when we talk about the courses that we're doing. Whoops. But if a student has a great topic, then what I do is I just send them into this tool and I just have them outline the different 3 parts of their essay, there's some resources here that I share with them. And if students don't have a compelling topic and they're still struggling to find what is that thing, that's like the main idea, then I just send them back into brainstorming. And we don't have time to talk about brainstorming today, but I've got a whole set of resources that in about 30 minutes, if they really, dig in and focus in, they should have 5 to 7 topics. And so it's really just kind of like send them back into the start of the process. And that may be obvious, but I'm just kind of like flow charting it. If students are setting a draft, and I don't have time to like really get into this in depth, but the questions that I'm asking when students are coming to me with a draft of something, if it's a challenges-based essay, I'm asking 4 questions. And each one of these can, again, kind of flow chart to a different resource or a different like fix. So if it's a narrative challenges-based essay, first I'm going, are the challenges clear? Because sometimes when I read an essay, it's not actually clear what the student was going through. They've kind of left it vague. So is the challenge, first of all, clear? Do I understand enough to know why this might be a big deal? Second, how those challenges impacted the student, because sometimes that's not clear, and the student can work on that. Third, is it clear what the student did to overcome the challenges? Because the student could definitely specifically focus on that. And then fourth, is it clear what the student learned through the experiences? What is that insight? And I know some of you are like, yes, I know, but this is like a really simple, like, okay, if the problem is X, do X1. If the problem is Y, do this. If the problem is Z, do this. And so each one of these can give you like a specific area to focus on. For montage, does the montage essay, is it clear what the topic or thematic thread is? This is where the log line can be useful, because sometimes students have like some cool ideas, but they don't have that clear, like, this is an essay about how beatboxing has helped me connect with my family, dig deeper into my cultural roots, and make friends for a lifetime, right? And so those three things are going to give you the outline for the different paragraphs. Do you have specific examples in each paragraph that clearly link back to whatever the topic or thematic thread is? And does each of those examples show values? This is what I call the nutritional part that colleges are really interested in. Because without this, we just have this, what we call fluff. For me, the difference between fluff and non-fluff is, does it have values connected to it? Can I point to that example and go, here's a value, a thing that I learned about you and what you're going to bring to a college campus. And if it doesn't have it, cut it or trim it to, like Lynn was talking about, trim it to that essence, that sentence or two sentences, and then boom, let's move on and let's focus on another value, something else that you want to show. In terms of the last part, what are those insights that answer so what in regards to either whatever the experience was or values that you gained through the experience. And so for each of these, and I don't have time to get into these right now, but I have a place that I send them. So if the student if the challenges and effects aren't clear, there's like a specific place, a specific resource that I will share with them on how to actually develop their challenges and effects. If the challenge and effects could be more compelling, there's a different place. If the what I did about it element needs to be strengthened, I'll just show you a quick example of this. If a student needs to know, like, hey, what did you do about it? Or if they feel like the reader needs to have a clearer sense of what they did about it, here are 11 ideas for improving the what I did part of the story. So for example, students can answer, what did you do as a result of, or thanks to your challenges? What moment changed things for you? Was there a turning point? And I give some examples. Did you take responsibility for anything that you hadn't before? Where did you go that you'd never been before? And that could be like somewhere physically to the student, or mentally or emotionally. Where did you go? Where did you travel to? Did you earn money to pay for anything? Did you become more engaged or take action around anything? So just giving students these specific kinds of questions. And again, I don't have time to give you all of them right this minute, but having specific, and this is what I call the pharmacist approach. It's like, oh, do we need to know more about, for example, once we've diagnosed it, do we need to know more about, let's say for montage, more insights? Great, here's a resource for that. And so first, I walk through like, what exactly is insight and how do you spot it? And then here are 10 ways to add insight to a personal statement. So some ways that students can bring in insight. And again, I know this is like fast and a lot of information, but students can try to think of the opposite. So what was the initial thing that you were thinking, or maybe the expected insight from this thing, and then actually flip it and do the opposite of that. So for example, instead of saying, I learned my body is capable of more than I'd originally thought, kind of an obvious insight, maybe you actually learned that you've been pushing your body too hard and you actually need more rest than you knew. Not what I expected you to say. So now we've got this value of like rest or self-care. Okay. So that's an example of that, sort of like, so in short, what this is sort of like, if you can kind of get quick at diagnosing what the issue is. And again, I love these 4 questions for narrative and these 4 questions for montage. Having a specific set of answers that sort of give students, here's what you can do in order to fix that, is going to help equip them with the resources they need in order to be able to answer these questions. All right, looking at time, I want to make sure we got time to talk about working with parents a little bit. So Lynn, again, sharp segue, but I'm going to kick it back to you. Will you talk just a little bit about when you've worked with parents over the years, like some things that you've learned that have been useful or helpful?
Absolutely. I'm going to talk about that, and I'm going to answer one person's question about, let's see, cinematic detail as I do. Hopefully, does it look good, Ethan?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So somebody was asking in the questions about what is cinematic detail, and I'm going to reference that here. Couple tips that I have for getting to know my students. And by the way, somebody else was asking about how do you get kids to open up too. When I interview families for my own business, and CEG does this too, where we have a 20 to 30-minute meet, with a family before we get paired up with a student, I ask for past writing, if possible, that they are excited about. It could be a narrative memoir that their freshman or sophomore English teacher had them do, piece of creative writing they did in 7th grade. And then I do a lot of interview questions like, well, so how do you feel when you get feedback from your English teacher? Has your English teacher ever asked you to do multiple drafts of something? I'm trying to get like a window into what their writing experiences have been like, so I don't make assumptions. And this really helps also to see how the parent is interacting with the student during this conversation and what they say about their child's writing, whether they're celebrating things or asking for help in certain skill gap areas. So I also try to get a sense of like, how long do you spend on an essay? Are you like a night before person or what, kind of thing to get your essays done. And, part D here is parent questionnaire. I do have a little questionnaire, by the way, and so does CEG, just asking questions about, tell me about your students' writing habits and things like that. So they can say things offline too. But the other thing that I do is really spell out, and this is especially for the parent, but I'm also asking the student, can you do this? Is I'm like, hey, if you work with me, you're going to have at least 2 deadlines a week. Do you have 5 to 7 hours free? And are you free, Wednesdays and Sundays? And parents love this. Students love it because then it cuts down the dialogue of, hey, have you done your stuff for Lynn yet? They know just to ask on Wednesdays and Sundays. And I'm also in grad school right now, so I have to be hyper structured with my life. Like I can't have everybody turning in things every day of the week. I need some time to myself on the weekend. So the deadlines are Wednesday nights and Sunday nights. And, sometimes students are doing it 4 a.m. on a Thursday. I don't care. As long as it's done by 8 a.m. Eastern with my coffee, I'm good, But anyway, during this whole interview, I'm taking notes. I'm also reading the room, seeing how the parent and student interact, that whole thing. If you would like to know more about kind of how I do my business, you're welcome to go to this very long URL. I have kind of a long URL of success-story.lynnhawks.com. My FAQs has a link to the contract I use with families. I call it a participation agreement. And this is another way I spell out a week in the life and what I'm expecting of you, and then what I agree to do for you. So that everybody's like, there's no mystery, right? I know CEG does a similar thing. And then the other thing I do, and this is my world of online learning where I was the administrative face of a program, I would write template emails for my instructors to send out and personalize every week, because we were creating, this was back in 2004, the very first online programs for gifted youth. And people were like, what is this thing? And I'm like, well, we need to stay in constant contact through email. And this cuts down on a lot of like extra conversations. So basically, I have these personalized templates and I personalize the action item for every week. I celebrate the skills that are being practiced and, where the student could work harder, but what they're doing really well. So there's all that space to personalize, but there's also just some like, hey, and this is what you do next. And here's where your calendar is and that kind of thing. I'm always regular on my schedule of feedback, always Thursdays and Sundays and Mondays that I'm giving feedback. Actually, that should be Monday. It should be Thursday, Monday. Everybody has access to their own little folder in Google Drive. And then if I have a situation where a parent is doing too much of the feedback or trying to jump in, I do kind of reassert the boundary that we have in the participation agreement, which is really this is an engagement between me and the student. And we don't want too many cooks in the stew at this stage. But there are going to be points where, if you want to weigh in or communicate with me or talk to me on Zoom or something, I'll totally be happy to talk to you. But it's really better to focus with my method, my curriculum, my way of doing things for now. And I think there's it's a nice way to say that, just also kind of, and also one thing CEG taught me is, the training I've gotten they said to me, hey, if you first ask the student, how do you feel about other cooks in the stew? How do you feel about your mom or your older sister who's in college weighing in? Is this cool with you? So you first try to read the room with the student before you approach the parent on this. I know a lot of you know all this already, but these are some other things that I just keep in mind. I really don't like being in text communication with a lot of people. that is overwhelming to me as an introvert. So email is my friend, and I try to push everything there. So everything's on the record. They have a whole set of emails to go through, and then everything's kept in Drive. So that's also something that really helps me in my business. And finally, I'll just say this thing that really helps me if there's a tense moment sometimes where the parent is thinking, just worried about their child's future, and they're like sending me emails that seem a little intense. I just try to remember, this is their baby, right? And even if I'm feeling slightly defensive, I also have to remember how the teenager can be sometimes too. They might be awesome with me, but they might be turning to their parent saying, get away from me. And the parent is frustrated because even though you're trying to be communicative, they don't feel that. So I try to start with a really positive email back, staying positive, even if I'm feeling slightly defensive. And especially demanding and frequent emails. Oh, there's a little error there, but basically I want to have reassurance just radiating off of my emails, because college applications are a big, wide open, scary landscape. So I just try to recalibrate if I'm feeling insecure and remember that and how I felt as a step parent and just say, okay, I need to calm down. Let me take a walk around the block. Now I'm going to answer this email, which I think a lot of you probably know, but it never hurts me to remind me of that. So those are just some of my quick tips there. I hope that's helpful.
That's awesome. Thank you. We don't have time to talk about structuring sessions, so we'll have to save it for a session. But I want to share just a quick word on this course that we've got coming up. It's the counselor training program, and I want to share with y'all what's new, because a lot is new this year. So this is, and Ashley, if you wouldn't mind just sharing the link with folks, this is the How to Write a Personal Statement course. And essentially we meet like this for an hour and a half. We extended the time, and there are two versions of it, once a week for 4 weeks. We've got a one-on-one, which might be useful for this group, and then we've got a version for large groups for those who are interested in coaching students in large groups. And then a thing that we've added this year by request, by popular demand, is the opportunity for counselors, as you're working through this, to write your own personal statement in a small cohort. And Lynn is leading some of those cohorts, and we're going to open it up to about 40 folks, and we're going to have groups of probably 6 to 8. And then Nada, who works with us, is leading the other cohorts, who's also pretty amazing. And in those groups, you'll kind of go through and here's the process of actually, it's sort of like writing group vibes, but it'll also give you the sense of hey, well, here's what my students are actually going through. And I've found, if you're a counselor who works with students, like an essay coach, that writing that and then sharing it with students kind of on a selected basis, or putting it up on your website, can actually be a really cool way of just giving folks a sense of your world and why you do this, why you do what you do. So just to give you a quick sense of it, it's like I said, once a week, March 1st, 8th, 15th, and 22nd. And we start with brainstorming. I'm going to share what I think are the most effective brainstorming exercises, the most effective ones that I found that I haven't shared a ton. And as I've taught this course, because these are ones that I've developed over the last year and a half or so. And then we're going to talk about structure. We're going to talk a lot about outlining and how do you really help students create a great outline so that it really sets them up for a great process. Revising, I've got tons on revising. Some of the stuff that I showed you already, insight, how do you figure out transitions? I've got a resource on that. And then we're going to do speed sessions where I'll review either your students' essays or, if there's a counselor who's writing something and they want some feedback, I'm happy to review those. And so we do those 10 to 11:30 a.m. But rumor is Ethan sometimes stays late for class for us to just talk and hang out a little bit. So we tend to run over. Now you don't miss anything. So we send out the recordings afterwards. But the main difference I want to show y'all, and the thing that I'm opening up to folks, is this Choose Your Own Adventure tool, which is, between you and me, it's about 250 pages of content. And it's a lot of stuff that will walk you through pretty much any part of the process. And we've got this FAQ here that makes it pretty easy to navigate. But if you have a question about, or your student has a question about revising, how do you build a stronger beginning for a narrative structure essay? You click here, and here are 3 ideas for opening a challenges-based essay. Or maybe it's I want to help, in the revising process, I'm trying to figure out, how do I clarify if my topic or thematic thread is unclear? So there's a resource for that. And then we organize it. This is kind of a look at the entire table of contents with all the stuff. So I'm going to be teaching the course this year based on the content inside this tool. And you'll see there's a counselors tab in here that's got things like, how do you lead workshops? And here's how to use this as a curriculum. Or Here's how to give feedback. This is the thing that I was sharing earlier. And here's a guide to cliche topics that you can use. So this is the main big difference. How do you raise the stakes in the essay? And it's going to be a ton of content. And also, usually what I do is I have these moments where I'm like, oh, here's another thing that I'm reading and I want to share, I want to talk about. Like this culture code thing was something that came to me like last week. We already planned to sort of do this, but I was like, oh, this is like a really good distillation of this. So I kind of dove in. And so you'll probably catch like, here's the sort of standard stuff. And then here's the thing that I'm thinking about the latest. And there will be moments when, parts where Lynn's going to come in and share specific stuff because she's, like I said, been thinking about this so much. So if you're interested, feel free to sign up. We'd love to have you. And then a thing that I said to Ashley, who's handling questions behind the scenes, thanks, Ashley, is that I'd love to just, if folks are interested in taking the course, or maybe you were kind of thinking about doing it, but if you sign up by Friday, we'll send you a free book. So we'll send you a copy of College Admission Essentials. And so all you need to do to get that is just forward your receipt to help@collegeessayguy.com. And maybe Ashley, you could put this in the chat just to let folks know this. And make sure you send your address, and Ashley will send you a free book, just as a little extra. Okay, so how do we get access to the Choose Your Own Adventure course? Yes, thank you for asking, Malak. That's inside the course. So if you take the course, you get access to this. And one of the things we're going to be talking about in the course is like using the Choose Your Own Adventure tool with students. And I haven't figured out how to price that yet. And so one of the things I'm going to be talking about actively with you all, with folks on the course, is help me figure out how to price that so that counselors can use that with students, because I haven't figured that out yet. So that's a vulnerability moment where I'm like, hey, let's co-create this together and figure that out. More questions. So Nancy's got one here. This is for you, Lynn. The way you structure your service is so interesting. It sounds helpful getting students to finish their process promptly, whereas each year I have students who start with me in June but are cramming to meet January 1st deadlines. If they don't stick to your schedule, what consequences do they face?
Well, so the quick answer is when I do the interview and I get information from the student and parent about writing style, experience, I then quote them a certain number of weeks, and I'll say, oh, your student has already written bunches of drafts. Okay, I think we can work together for 3 weeks and then see if you want to re-up for more services, or are you just done, And I pretty much just keep it bounded by 4 weeks, 6 weeks. And I promise certain things within that time, which is why it's so important that the parents see the Google Drive, because I have mentor essays, kind of like CEG inspired me to get a whole bunch of mentor essays of my former students and CEG students. I want the parent to see all the things they're getting. Kind of like the Choose Your Own Adventure tool that I don't have anything like that degree, but I have a lot of materials and handouts and stuff. So we do a lot in a week. And then I also have a 4-day service. I have kids who come back at the end and just do a quick revision thing. So we do a lot in 4 days as well. So that's how I've done it.
A question came in from Nancy. Nancy says, I took the advanced course for counselors last year. Very helpful. Does the content in this new course differ greatly? It does. That was all separate essays. I mean, it does talk about narrative and montage both, but I would say the content is like 75% different, just in terms of like the resources that you'll get and the stuff that we're going to be talking about. And we go from the beginning of the process, because I think I kind of jumped in with some assumptions. The advanced course I taught after folks had already taken this. So it's like, imagine that the advanced course is like, if you watch Spider-Man No Way Home without seeing all the other Spider-Man movies. So that's a really specific reference, but I just saw the new Spider-Man movie and hadn't seen all the Spider-Man movies. So it's sort of like going back and getting all the other content that sort of underpins the advanced course. Let's see, there's some more Q&A. Oh, I have to click the Q&A tab. Great. Oh, it actually has this lovely doc that she's set up for us, and I'm totally not looking at. Let's see. Somebody wants to know more about cinematic detail. And is there a way for international students to work directly with CEG students? Yeah, if you're interested in that, we do have a way that we partner with counselors. If you're interested in that, you can email help@collegeessayguy.com, and we'll tell you more about that. Lynn, will you share just a little bit more about cinematic detail, about what you mean by that, and what does a cinematic detail look like?
So when I first started my business, relied heavily on Ethan's essence object exercises and 21 details as a great way to begin getting cinematic detail. And then I want to also emphasize the vulnerability loop conversations, that once the kids give me their essence object exercises and 21 details, And I asked if they have any fun pictures they want to share, anything. Our first session is we just start telling each other stories. And I listen to what I consider gold when they say, oh yeah, you know, that time when I got my crazy cat, you know, crazy cat lady action figure out. And I said, well, tell me, what does it look like? Can you show me a picture? And we talk about the visual, the sensory details, all that stuff. And I start getting them to brainstorm that really visual images as a way to move into outlining and planning. So,
yes.
And then that's what we're editing for the whole time. Where are we seeing you pop off the page?
Yes. And one more came in from Avery just now. Do either of you have any quick tips for how to have valuable conversations about college essays when I only get to meet with one student for 40 minutes every month? And we also have to cover other things like financial aid. What are the top priorities of things to cover? So I don't have time to get into that right this moment, Avery, because it would take me, you know, a few minutes to answer. But just know that the other course, the other personal statement course, which is on how to work with students in large groups, you know, if you have a medium to large caseload, we get more into that about how do you have those quick conversations, because it is such a different process, and we do like a whole structure for that. So that's something that I covered on yesterday's. I don't know if you were on that one or not, Avery, which by the way is my daughter's middle name, but we covered that a little bit, and we're going to get more into that. And that course, you know, if you're in a public school or charter school counselor, that course is pay what you can. So there's no financial barrier to joining for that. And it's just limited to those 90-minute sessions, and all the homework is optional. So I'd love to talk to you more about that. And I have so much to say about it. But I just don't want to, I'm nervous that if I jumped into it now, that it would take us way past time. So thank you all for being here. Thank you, Lynn, for being here. I'm so grateful to share time and space with you. And we look forward to connecting with you more. If you want to join us for the afternoon session, you're welcome to. We'll have a different Q&A. A lot of the content will be similar. But thanks for being here, and have a beautiful week.
Thank you.